Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming on what I know is quite a sort of close afternoon. So please do heed Spencer's words about getting a drink or anything if you do need to. So today I'm going to give you an overview of our latest exhibition, Tapestry Here and Now. I hope that you'll leave this with a sort of a better idea of why we're doing the show and also a bit more background about the specific works that are included in the exhibition. So the first question I'm going to ask is, what is a tapestry? So it might seem like a basic question because it's a word that we're all familiar with, but actually there's a particular sort of way that we're thinking about tapestries for this exhibition. So tapestries are traditionally hand-woven on a loom. So what you can see in this picture is one of the artists in our exhibition, Valerie Kirk, making a tapestry at her loom. In fact, she's making the piece that's in the exhibition upstairs. And there are a couple of things that you can see in this image which really give you a sense of how all the works in this exhibition were made. So what you have is a loom with a sort of framework of vertical threads, which are called warp threads, and they provide the structure, the framework of the tapestry. They're actually usually hidden by the other threads going the other way. They're usually hidden in the completed work. So the threads which go horizontally are called the weft threads, and they're interwoven between the warps by hand, as you can see in this picture. So often makers will use wooden bobbins to help them guide the threads through the warp threads, and also it helps them to sort of press down on the structure of the piece as well as they put new threads through the structure. So the design of a tapestry is created by building up coloured threads horizontally along this framework of the warp threads. So how do you remember that? So I always confuse the warp and the weft. They're sort of particular terminology that you might need to know for this exhibition. But I think we finally hit on a way to remember it. If you think of the weft is horizontal, and so it goes from left to right. So it's a bit cheesy, but it does help you remember. Going back to the sort of themes of this exhibition, so Tapestry Here and Now focuses on artists who create handmade tapestries woven on a vertical loom like this one. And the idea behind the show is really to emphasise that tapestry making, although it's founded sort of over many centuries, it's a very traditional craft. Tapestry making today is anything but traditional. So the works in the show are really showing that that people are doing exciting things with this medium, and perhaps unexpected things. And I think when you go up to the exhibition space, you'll get a sense of how they're doing that. They're using scale to do that, so creating really huge works in tapestry, and also playing with colour, using the sort of full potential of different materials that are available to them. And I think one way of sort of thinking about what the artists in this show are doing is, I think about the beadwork basket. So you all know the beadwork basket in the Posnet Gallery, and the way that that piece sort of has the vivacity, the brightness of colour that all the stumpwork embroideries, which were made at the same time, have lost over the years because they've faded. You know, often when you think of tapestries, they're perhaps what you'd see in a National Trust house, sort of huge things across the wall with very sort of detailed imagery, but they're often quite faded, they've perhaps lost their real kind of vibrant colour. And so in this exhibition, you'll be reminded again that colour was once central to these pieces as well. So I hope it will enable people to kind of think differently about historic tapestry, and also to see these contemporary pieces in sort of all their brightness and exciting kind of colour and technique. And I think you'll notice as well that a lot of the artists are being quite experimental with the medium of tapestry. So you know, they're really playing with traditions. You know, for instance, some works will actually display the warp threads, which are usually hidden in a finished piece, as part of the work. So we'll come on to that a bit more later, but that just gives you a bit of a background. So another thing to think about with tapestry is that it's a term that can be quite familiar, but it's often used to describe different sorts of things. So you might refer to, for instance, needlepoint as tapestry. So what that is where you follow a pattern perhaps on a sort of canvas surface, and you're effectively embroidering or sewing in between the sort of guided holes of the canvas, as you can see at the top left. And often that will be referred to as tapestry, but in fact that's not the kind of tapestry that we're talking about with this exhibition. And equally, here's a bit of the Bayeux tapestry, the sort of the most famous tapestry of them all, but of course it's not actually a tapestry, it's an embroidery on linen. So I'm just showing these to kind of give a sense of kind of what's different about the tapestries in our show, what kind of tapestries they are. And another way you'll hear about tapestry is, for instance, you might have seen the recent show of Grayson Perry's tapestries at the Victoria Art Gallery last year. And they're amazing, large-scale, colourful works. And again, you might be asked, why is Grayson Perry not in this exhibition? Because he's not. And I'll tell you, the reason is because what Perry's tapestries are actually jacquard weavings. So it's a process a bit more like carpet making. They are pieces made on a mechanised loom, historically, they were made using these punched cards, which would kind of tell the machinery where to move to create these very complicated patterns. And today you can do that with a computer to create these extraordinary designs and very colourful, amazing surfaces and things. But they're not made by hand, they're made by machine. And every tapestry in our exhibition, Tapestry Here and Now, is made by hand by the artist that is exhibiting in the show. They're all made by hand on a vertical loom. So that's really something quite distinctive about the tapestries in this exhibition. And just, you'll see on screen there's a link about a really excellent video that the V&A made about jacquard weaving, what the process is, which is quite interesting. We can circulate the link later if you want to see a bit more about that. So a bit of background about this exhibition. These are the two venues where the exhibition has been seen before. So at the top is the National Centre for Craft and Design, which is in an old tapestry mill that's been converted in Sleaford in Lincolnshire. And it's their touring show that we've taken here at the Holburne. So they displayed the whole show there last year. And then it's also travelled to MAC, the Art Centre in Birmingham. Birmingham took just a small selection of the works on show here, so we've got the whole show at the Holburne, so to end the tour, and we're the final venue of this exhibition. And one of the things that I just want to kind of highlight in this show is one of the ways that the show has been made possible. So we've taken this touring show from the National Centre for Craft and Design and worked with them to kind of adapt it for our spaces and so on. You'll notice this is actually an image of the design for the wall outside the Worth Gallery, the sort of introduction where the volunteers' desk is. You can just see the top of it in this picture. And you'll notice that there are loads of different logos, and these are all the supporters that funded the National Centre for Craft and Design to put this show together. And it also explains why we, who normally sort of can't really borrow works very internationally because it's just so expensive, it's because of these funders that we're able to show this really rich mixture of international makers in the museum. So, you know, we're sort of immensely grateful to all of those sponsors for effectively sponsoring the National Centre for Craft and Design, enabling them to bring the works together for our exhibition. So this is the exhibition space at the National Centre for Craft and Design. So Nina, the exhibitions coordinator, and I travelled up there last year to see the show and to work out how we might start adapting it for the Holburne. And you can see in here just some views of their space. You can see it's quite sort of industrial, but also much bigger than our space. You'll get a sense of how big some of the works are when you go upstairs, but they had a much bigger space. So the first challenge that we had really was to try and make sure that we could fit all the works in the show. And I was really keen to keep the whole show together for the Holburne, to actually show every artist that they had included in the exhibition. So the first thing that I did was played around on PowerPoint. So this was my initial scale model, just checking whether everything could fit. So you'll see this is the second draft, but this is pretty much the layout that is upstairs. And so you get a sense of where we worked out, you know, how I was going to fit the walls in, and kind of how all the works would fit. And then the next stage, which was quite new for me because most of the shows that I've done have been with 3D objects rather than flat art. So I was able to use this tool, Exhibitor Pro, to plan the spacing of the exhibition. So here you can see some of the images of the layouts from Exhibitor Pro, which helped me to work out where everything would go and sort of how we would space everything out. That's sort of just to give you a bit of an insight into how the exhibition came together. And I think one of the things I just want to say about the layout is that, as Spencer said, we're using both the spaces in the top floor, so the Roper Gallery and the Worth Gallery. And the exhibition, although it's quite open and sort of free, there are loose sections within the exhibition as well. So the themes of the exhibition, which I think do run through the different pieces in the show, are really about sort of structure, colour, material. A lot of the artists are working quite creatively with different materials and really experimenting with the medium of tapestry. But one of the things that I think comes through a lot of the different works in the show are there's a very sort of resonant examination of the world around us, whether that's looking at the theme of landscape, which is a really strong theme in the show, and actually how we react to the world around us, whether that's sort of beautiful countryside or urban environments. And also there's a strong theme of memory and also of politics. And I think those three themes run through, landscape, memory and politics, run through a lot of the different works in this exhibition. And I think as I'll now start to go through the individual artists, individual works in the show, and I think you'll see that a lot of the works have a real visual impact, but of course have layers of meaning beyond that, and I think really merit sort of looking a bit closer. So the first thing, just before I start going through all of the works as well, is that one of the things you might notice from the labels in the exhibition is that none of the works have a date on the label. Just to sort of give a bit more information about when the works were made. So the exhibition is called Here and Now. It's absolutely about contemporary tapestries, but of course the show has been touring for a year, so most of the works were made in the run-up to the show. So as a minimum, it's going to take a month to make any kind of tapestry. So most of the works were commissioned specifically for the exhibition. Some of them were existing works already, but effectively that means that every work in the show dates from at least 2015, but most of them are 2015, 2016, depending on, specifically when that artist was working on the piece. So, they're very recent before they came into this exhibition. So the first piece you can see, and I just want to say something briefly about the images as well. So the images that I've used in the PowerPoint, I've deliberately not used sort of major vistas of the exhibition because I want you to see the space, fresh. And some of the photographs are snapshots that I took on my iPad when we were visiting the exhibition. And some of them are professional photographs. I think you'll probably be able to tell the difference. But if they look a little bit wonky and drab, that's my photography. So I hope you'll get a pleasant surprise when you see the works in person in a few minutes. So the first piece that we've seen the work in progress images already, this is by Valerie Kirk, an Australian artist. It's called Floating Fossil. And what the piece is about is how difficult it is for us to visualize the very, very distant past. So Valerie Kirk visited the Age of Fishes Museum in Canowindra, New South Wales, Australia, and was inspired by a particular fossil that she saw there, and then translated that fossil through drawings into the tapestry that we can see here. And it was really about how the reality of the past will always be slightly beyond our grasp. And difficult to visualize. And again, we've seen the work in progress, but you can kind of really get a sense here, I think, of how an image is built up and, with all the different threads that go into creating this range of colours. The next piece is by Fiona Rutherford, a British artist, and it's called All About Everything. It's seemingly abstract, but in fact, her work is full of references to people, music, words, and events. And many sort of symbols, marks and patterns that all have a sort of particular meaning for the artists. But in particular, her sort of great strength is wonderful colour. That's something that really is important to her. And to quote the artist, "I love the emotional impact of colour, creating an immediate sense of energy through a vivid but limited palette." And what we can see here is actually my bad photo of the piece on the left. And then here, it's actually a sort of paper collage of how the piece would be laid out, which she then used to translate the design into tapestry. Next is a Norwegian artist called Kristin Citadel, and her piece called New Territory. For Citadel, a lot of the inspiration comes from science fiction and computer games, but using that as a starting point to ask questions about our times. For instance, is technology our new religion? Can it save humanity from an environmental catastrophe? And she's particularly fascinated by the motif of a control room. So in this piece, we're almost seeing through the artist's eyes onto a new and unknown landscape, whether that's a planet that we've destroyed or a new place we've just arrived at or a familiar place. It's really kind of up to us, the viewer, to see how we interpret that. And one of the things that I really like about this piece is that seeing it in real life, you get a sense of the complexity of the colours here, but also, it really makes you challenge what scale you're looking at, because to me, this sort of control board, the panel in front of the person is sort of almost like a cityscape, and I think it makes you sort of question what you're looking at, I think, and even though this is quite a modern seeming piece, there's a real tie with tradition as well, and traditional tapestry making from Norway. So the weft is actually a yarn made from the top coat of the wool of a type of sheep called Old Norwegian sheep. So very tied to sort of her nation and sort of something that had been used throughout history. The next piece is perhaps the most local artist in the exhibition, Gilly Edwards, who's actually Scottish, but she lives in Bristol. And there are two pieces of her work in the show, both really looking at the idea of the horizon line and the particular fascination with landscapes, so they're quite abstract landscapes. The piece on the left was made on a trip to Kessel Barton, which is in Cornwall, near the Helford River, a very beautiful part of Cornwall, and is, as the artist says, it's based on the distinctive yellow lichens amongst the dark stone walls and the dark rolling fields of corn and wild grasses. And you'll notice something surprising when you see this piece, quite how much Edwards is interested in the horizon and the landscape, in that this is actually two pieces. And in the centre is a sort of mirrored line, which is at the landscape, so that you, the viewer, can kind of almost see yourself as you experience the vista and the landscape that she's presenting. The second piece is actually 52 pieces, and it's a diary in tapestry. So it's called Diary of 52, using every last thread of time. And it's each piece is made to a specific size, but using up at random the threads that Gilly Edwards had been working with that week. So it's really a year's making in one piece, which I think is a really lovely thought. And you can see how the kinds of works that she was making at the time have had a massive impact on what the finished work looks like. And just to say, actually, Gilly Edwards will be doing a tea time talk later in the season. I think it's in September, and she'll be talking about her work there, so that might be of interest. The next piece is by Fiona Hutchison, another British artist, and her pieces are particularly interested in the experience of watching the movements of the sea. For the artist, these powerful bodies of water are constantly moving, constantly changing. They can be dangerous and unpredictable, a possible metaphor for our current political, cultural, and ecological future. I think that's something that you'll definitely see with a lot of these artists, that they may be seemingly presenting, a kind of a beautiful depiction of a landscape, but actually a lot of them are really concerned with the state of the world and actually the things that we're doing to the world and how we might experience that. And And I just want to show a lovely work in progress image of this piece as well. And what you can actually see is on the left here, the loom with a sort of a cartoon behind. That's a drawing which tapestry artists for many years have used to actually guide the different threads and create the pattern that they've designed. So perhaps the most familiar examples of those might be Raphael's cartoons in the V&A for his huge tapestries. So they're drawings that were then translated into tapestry, and you get a glimpse of that process here. But one of the things that's quite interesting and distinctive about the way that Fiona Hutchison has created her design is here. This is actually a very textured paper, and she's created the design by tearing paper and colouring it to create that pattern. And then here you see the paper model that she's using to create this bigger design. The next artist is another Scottish artist called Sarah Brennan, and she creates these sort of vistas of landscapes, particularly interested in trees. Again, she's very interested in the Scottish landscape, which she portrays using a very sort of quite limited colour palettes. But again, you'll see when you see the real thing, you'll get a sense of the real depth that these works have that I think is not captured in my photography. And again, Sarah Brennan is really interested in where the yarns have come from, the histories that they've had. So she uses old yarns with specific histories, meaning that she has only very limited quantities, and therefore the amount of a particular yarn that she has will determine the outcome of the piece that she can make with it. Another really large-scale piece here, this is by Philip Sanderson. It's called Windblown Tree. And for Sanderson, one of his real interests is exploring the similarities between the woven and the pixelated image. So the idea of how you might transfer designs between different media. And Windblown Tree is one of a series of very large-scale tapestries that Sanderson's made with very heavy, less traditional, less conventional materials, woven on a very wide warp. So woven into this piece are different kinds of wool and yarn, but also printed threads, printed cottons, and a whole variety of materials. It almost looks like a kind of a rug or something, but it's a tapestry made with these quite unusual materials. And that's very important to Sanderson, as he says that strips of printed fabric combined with coloured threads bring dynamism and spontaneity to the weaving process and make the structure of the tapestry more visible. And you can absolutely see the structure here, but one of the things that I felt was very important with a piece like this is how we displayed it. That's had a lot of consideration, because I really wanted people to be able to get close to the works, but also to be able to see it from a distance, because something like this really does change depending on where you view it from in the space. And here, just to give you a glimpse into Sanderson's process of working, here's a design for that piece. So you can see more clearly here the windblown tree that's at the centre of the tapestry. And it also gives you a sense of that sort of collage feeling. It's a bit like, David Hockney's photographic collages, this idea of an image stretching out and moving and changing. This is a detail from a piece by Joan Baxter called Hallaig 2. Again, Baxter is very inspired by the Scottish Highlands, which is her sort of area, and she's very interested in the landscapes and also the cultural heritage of the far north of Scotland. And the title Hallaig is taken from a poem by Sorley MacLean, in which the poet describes how the empty landscape of his ancestral home is haunted by memories of the people who once lived there. For me, that's Joan Baxter. The poem captures exactly the atmosphere of the ruined villages and lost fields I encounter whilst walking in my own landscape. Here, you see that each artist has a slightly different working process that you can see from the different images that I've shown you. So, here are some different designs for the composition and also playing around with colour and texture in preparation for making. The next piece is maybe familiar to you now from the different posters and things that you've seen around the building. It's by a Japanese artist called Yasuko Fujino, and it's called In the Garden. And again, it's quite hard to give a sense of scale from some of these images, but all I'll say is it's much bigger than it appears on screen, even in this space. It's absolutely vast, and I think you'll get a real surprise when you see it because, again, the structure of it is quite unexpected. It's made from lots of smaller pieces, hung together in this quite distinctive way using panel pins to display it in the gallery. And for Yasuko Fujino, the garden is about the boundary between the everyday and the extraordinary. She's actually very interested in memory and actually the traditions of working with tapestry, and particularly the way that tapestry has been used for many centuries as a storytelling tool, that you contain different stories within it. And so this is really the story of Fujino's memories of spaces that she's visited, but also of her experience of the world. So it's a very personal depiction, and yet again these sort of lively colours that sort of make you want to trace the journey throughout the piece. This piece is by a Finnish artist called Aino Kajanimi, and for her it's all about glimpses of a dream where everything is at once familiar and not familiar. And I don't know about you, but I found in the heat the last few days I've had some very strange dreams, so I think this one has some real resonance for me at the moment. It's sort of slightly dreamlike feel. And for the artist, the child figure in this piece greets us with open arms to create a sort of very optimistic piece. But of course, there's a sense of darkness too. There's a real mixture of different things going on in this piece. And I think the artist is using really extraordinary textures in this piece. It's one that seeing an image just doesn't cut it. You really have to see the real thing. And I think when you do see it, you'll see that amazing texture. But I think the texture itself has a sort of meaning for the work. So for the artist, she says, I feel that even sad things are more easily approachable in textile because the material in itself holds optimistic and soft values. The next piece is by a Latvian artist called Rolands Krūtovs, and it's again focusing on the idea of reminiscences and future hopes and associations and dreams, and the subject is someone who's following their own uncertain path while someone else is watching over them with loving memories. And so I think when you start to stare at this piece, do you put yourself in the position of the sort of tightrope walker in the piece, or as the person watching over them? Is that the artist? Is that you? Who are they? I think it's kind of a strangely compelling piece, and it's actually a response to a story told to the artist by an elderly poet about her own experience when she was young. So again, it's about sort of, is it the poet that's depicted, or is the artist watching over her life? It's quite an intriguing piece. Another Latvian artist appears in the show. This is Ieva Krumina, and her piece, A Visitor from the Future, is telling the story of, a bit like Valerie Kirk's piece that we've seen already, very interested in ancient artifacts, and in particular a 5,000-year-old anthropomorphic artifact found in the Baltic territories. And for her, this artifact holds information about the past, and she thinks of it as almost holding a formula that could be used by people of the future. So thinking about how memory and knowledge of the past might help us to move forward. And one of the things that I think is extraordinary about this piece is she probably uses the most diverse range of different techniques and also materials in her work. And when you sort of encounter the piece, you're just immediately struck by the extraordinary colour. Like there's a depth to it that you just can't imagine, and the texture as well. So there are applique parts of this, so that they're sort of sewing onto the surface of the tapestry, as well as using digital printing onto this kind of large-scale tapestry. The next piece I've shown, this image is of it installed in another place. we've displayed it sort of flat on the wall in Holburne. But this piece is quite a striking, obviously you can see it's very long, very large scale piece, and it's a flower in this tapestry. It's actually the spider plant that's inspired this piece, which, though beautiful, is actually poisonous. And in Japan, where Misao Watanabe is from, there's a superstition that if the spider plant is brought inside the house, then the house will burn down. So you can see there's a sort of darkness to this beautiful pattern as well. And for the artist, there's a real contradiction between the public facade and our private thoughts. And for her, the sight of the blossoming spider lily always reminds me that humans too have two sides. And I think there's something kind of slightly terrifying about this piece for me, as well as something quite beautiful. This, again, is a photograph from another exhibition, but it's the story of the artist Ai Ito's journey through the Baltic. The scenes from left to right following her route from Tallinn in Estonia through Riga in Latvia and Vilnius in Lithuania. One of the things that I think this piece does really well is telling a story in one frame, if you like. And so you can trace her journey, and actually here's the artist in the piece. And it was particularly, it sort of particularly resonated to me when we were installing the piece last week. There are some figures here watering plants and putting these up, and they're actually standing on ladders. So it really reminded me of what we all look like as we put up these great giant tapestries in the exhibition space. But I think one of the things that really strikes me about this is when I first saw it, I didn't realise it was about the Baltic. I mean, you can see from the rooftops particularly that there's, it's perhaps not familiar, and yet there's something so familiar about, this group of schoolboys and the buses, and, I feel like it kind of emphasises all the things that tie us together, which at the moment I feel is really important. There's a sort of universality to the stories here. There's a familiarity to us. The next piece is another Japanese artist, a very young artist who actually trained with Fujino, who did the In the Garden piece, the green sort of large-scale piece. And you can see that Sakai is doing something quite unusual with the medium of tapestry. I mentioned artists leaving the warp threads visible, and here that's a fundamental part of the structure. She's only filled in certain parts of the piece. And it's called Let's Pretend, and it's really about comparing childhood dreams and the immersive virtual world that we can all be part of. So for Sakai, she describes both the virtual world and our dreams as vague, strange worlds which defy logic. And Sakai's tapestries have, these very distinctive, bright neon colours and reflect our experiences of modern life. That is sort of a brightness, and we're kind of bombarded with images. But also, her world is peopled by the sort of strange creatures, whether they're sort of monsters or fairies that appear in children's dreams. So it's really about, memory and also the experience of the world that we have today. Jump through there, but back to this one. This is another artist who's very much experimenting with how we can understand tapestry. So Tonya Haidel-Surli uses recognizable cartoon figures to tell very subversive stories. So here, We Don't Know What the Little Bird Sings is about the balance of power. And like Sakai in the previous slides, Haidel-Surli leaves the warp threads visible. So you can see here at the top the birds sort of suspended from the actual threads which hold the piece together. And she also leaves the weft threads sort of hanging loose at the back. So those are ones that you'd normally tuck away and trim and hide away. She makes them central to the piece. And the idea behind that is both to make the viewer curious about the technique and also point to the history of tapestry. Her second piece, which you saw briefly a minute ago, is called Bloom and Jolly Future. And here she's exploring the idea of the artist's mother and her fear, I quote, of indirectly harming her children through the choice of living a public role. And framing the work in this way, because you can see there's a sort of metal frame around the piece, it sort of, to me, it suggests a sort of cartoon strip containing all the action of the movement, with the loose threads here sort of creating that sense of dynamism and movement in the piece. But also that, you know, it's quite nice to be able to understand how a lot of the other pieces in the show would have been made as well, because if you can imagine, most of the other pieces would have been created like this, but then these threads would have been chopped to create the finished piece, and the structure would have been kept in place by those threads. So here it's sort of left on the frame, so you can really see how a tapestry is actually made. And of course there's the little baby trapped underneath, and don't worry, it's supposed to be like that. The next section of the exhibition is in the Worth Gallery. So all the pieces I've talked about so far are on show in the Roper Gallery. The Worth Gallery, we've placed all the works in the what we're calling the political section of the exhibition, and the feeling of that space is quite different. We've made the most of the fact that the Worth is a much smaller space. We've used a much darker paint colour and kind of different lighting to create a very different feeling. And also, there's a notice outside that gallery, which you may have spotted already, but we're because some of the works in that space are, you know, perhaps a little bit more challenging. We've put a sort of an advisory notice outside, just saying that some visitors may find some of the works challenging, and that we advise parents to just check they're happy to let their kids in there. And I know that Josh and Spencer will have more to say about that side of things, you know, but I think you'll see from the works that they're very much part of that story about how tapestry can sort of challenge and be the voice of our times. So just to go through the work in the next space, this is Ayako Matsumura, another very young Japanese artist. Her piece, Bodysuit Transformation, is all about skin. She's very interested in skin and representing it in tapestry, as she sees it as the interface between clothing and the body. To quote from Matsumura, "This is where, due to the skin's intimate relationship with both the inside and outside of the body, the effects of an individual's psychology, habits and age are most honestly displayed." So in this piece, Matsumura is using strips of animal skin as a means of drawing attention to our own skin. Here, just a couple of images that give a sense of how Matsumura designed the piece, and also the sense of really texture that you can see in the different pieces that she's made. And you might also notice that there's a slightly strange smell in the Worth Gallery. The reason for that is because Matsumura's piece is actually made from polythene and leather. So there's a kind of slightly plasticky smell, so that just so you're aware that that's what that comes from, because she's using, again, these quite unusual materials to weave her tapestry. The next piece is by a Canadian artist called Barbara Heller, and it's called Ozymandias, you can see. It's based on the poem by Percy Bysshe Shelley. "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty in despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." So the meaning of politics is becoming more sort of urgent for Barbara Heller, and so her recent works, as she said, are much more explicit than previous works. As the news becomes more depressing, she feels that she has to express that in her work. And the theme of this tapestry, which, you know, on the surface is this extraordinarily colourful bird, a very beautiful piece, is actually about the terrible legacy of landmines. And on the surface, again, she's using quite unusual materials. So here there's a section which actually uses animal bones on the surface as part of the piece. And I think for me this is a really good example of kind of the point of this show in some ways is to celebrate the extraordinary technique and actually the extraordinary beauty of a lot of these pieces, but also to recognise that sometimes the meaning of the pieces for the artist goes much deeper than you might originally expect. Next works are by Karen Penny, another UK-based artist, a British artist, and her pieces are very much a comment on the current global and economic social situation. So you can see with slightly provocative titles like Golden Handshake here on the left, and then Stop Go is very much about the urban landscape and how we see it. So it's very much inspired by her time in Manhattan. But one of the things that you'll notice in Karen Penny's work is that she uses gold thread. So that has a really strong tie to sort of history in terms of using very expensive, costly materials in making tapestries. And I think when you see that gold thread lit up in the Worth Gallery, you can kind of see kind of why people would have used gold and silver in their tapestries in the past, because it just glows in this extraordinary way, even in quite low light. It really adds a sort of luminosity to the space. This just gives you a sense of how Penny translates her works into tapestry texture. You can see they're very, very precise, the way that she makes these pieces, and actually a couple of them are very, very small scale. You know, she's working on a much more precise scale than a lot of the larger pieces are. And here you can just make out the kind of graph paper where she sort of set out the very rigid sort of formal structure of her pieces. So just at the next two pieces, we've got on the right, The Streets Are Paved with Gold, which is again about her experiences of America and its sort of grid system. And then on the left, a piece which I suppose speaks for itself in terms of its title. But for Penny, her idea that each piece is a very strong comment on the global and economic social situation is really exemplified by this piece. So I'm going to quote from Penny. She says, "Understandably, this work can appear offensive, but the lightness and refined aesthetic deliver the message with the same impact as a company who delivers a severance package to its employees." So it's quite a pointed comment on sort of what we might find offensive and why. So the next piece, which you'll notice is actually displayed in a slightly different configuration in the exhibition space, is by another British artist, Pat Taylor, so 670413. And it's you'll recognise immediately a couple of the faces in this piece. For Pat Taylor, the identity of people and history are absolutely central to her work. She's interested in what she calls the landscape of the face, and all of the faces are in some way recognisable in her work. You know, some of them are obviously famous faces that we can recognise immediately, like Putin and Blair here, and others are familiar either within our own lives or from the endless images that we see. For Taylor, the images, the tapestries without a face, are blank spaces of possibility, offering a canvas for the viewer to create a narrative as we do in life. And I know that for me, the orange one has taken on a particular resonance as a particular president at the moment, who I think is sort of notably missing. And here, a really strong reminder that what sort of strike you as almost photographically realistic images are again made from textiles. I think it shows you the extraordinary versatility of this material. So here you can see Blair sort of half done again with the cartoon behind, which shows you sort of how she's working. And again, these two having not yet been cut off their warp threads. And then the final piece in the Worth Gallery is by an American artist called Erin Riley. This is a self-portrait, and Riley's really interested in the use of selfies posted on social media. They're images of an intimate and often sexual nature, and for Riley, there's a real contrast between the immediacy of the selfie and the time-consuming labour of tapestry weaving. Because, of course, each of these pieces would have taken, months and months for the artist to create, and yet we can all just create and share things within a fraction of a second. And it's really exploring that sort of extraordinary shift in how we communicate, which has taken place in really the 21st century. And I think Riley's also particularly interested in the honesty of sexuality and how imagery, relationships and sex are changing as a result of the mass depiction of such intimate images. you can see it in its full length. But what we're looking at is Edward McKnight Kauffer's depiction of the arts. So it's actually it's the attributes of the arts. So you can see a sort of a seated muse-like figure, and then the different attributes of art and architecture. So here, the top of a column, a globe, a book, and it's really about reflecting the importance of understanding the classical past in this piece. And I think the muted colours are sort of so of their era, but actually have a striking modernity as well. This could almost have been made sort of 30, 40 years after it was, so I think it's really great to show that. Just to finish up, I want to show you just this Barbara Heller image again. I'm deliberately not showing any installation shots, as I said before, because I want you to sort of go into the space and see it. But one of the things I did want to say about the exhibition is we've taken on board comments from particularly Silver, where people wanted to almost have a way of enticing visitors to see the show. So we've gone for a sort of semi-translucent door to the Roper Gallery, so you can peer in if you want to hopefully encourage people to go into the space. But of course the stripes that you'll see throughout the different designs in the building are actually taken from the original graphics, but we've sort of adapted them for our spaces. And the vertical lines are actually like a warp. So the idea is it's sort of playing on the idea of how the tapestries were made. So that's what those sort of vertical lines are all about. One of the things that I think you'll notice about this exhibition is really quite different to a lot of our other shows, is there are no barriers. Everything is displayed ex case on the wall, and you can get very close to the objects. And that is absolutely fundamental, I think, to appreciating these objects. I'm sure from some previous shows that we often have government indemnity insurance for our exhibitions, which comes with a sort of whole host of things like having to have barriers a metre away and things like that. We've taken the decision to do it a bit differently for this show, so that people can really get up close, so that people can see the works. And just to say as well that this is how they've been displayed in the previous venues, everything on open display, and actually they've really not had very many issues with people trying to touch things. The most likely way that people will try to touch things, and I'm sure they will try to touch things, but just to sort of reassure you and put it out there, that I think you'll have particularly enthusiastic textile makers perhaps trying to quickly flip over a corner and look at the back. I think that's going to be the most likely thing. But our message really is that we obviously need to be kind of vigilant and not at all encourage that kind of behaviour. We've got please do not touch signs at strategic points in the exhibition, and Nina and I have got more being produced as well, so that should we need to add more, we can do that. But the message is that if people are trying to touch, is just to explain to them that actually, our job is to look after the pieces for the future, and if everybody touches them, the work will get damaged, it will fade, it will degrade, and so we just ask that people please do keep their distance, but also appreciate that we're hopefully encouraging them to get close, to see those colours up close, to see those textures in a really intimate way in our spaces, and that's really the strength of the show. But of course, although we think people will really enjoy that sense of space and closeness, we really do urge you to keep an eye out for us as well if you're looking after the space, because if there are particular hotspots or particular pieces that people seem to be really going for, we can add barriers, we can reassess. So at the moment we're hoping that our minimal approach will work, but we rely on you to tell us if there are particular objects that are getting targeted or anything like that. So, and just the last thing I want to say is, you'll have seen the What's On. There's a really great programme of events that obviously Sophie, who's just recently left the museum, has put together, and they include a really interesting symposium which is going to take place towards the end of the exhibition, where some of the artists in the show, Yasuko Fujino, Valerie Kirk, Pat Taylor, and also Leslie Miller, who curated the exhibition and is actually a tapestry maker herself as well, will be posing the question, Tapestry, the Narrative of Our Times. That's going to take place on Friday the 29th of September. And I mentioned that Gilly Edwards will be talking about her work in September as well. There's the Dyson talk that Spencer's mentioned. And also, I want to show you, this is, you know, me putting my pride aside, this little bit of tapestry that I made on a workshop with Karen Penny, one of the artists who's actually doing a practical day workshop. So she did one last year with, which was at Hauser and Worth, and I went along to that and made this sculptural tapestry, just to reassure you that it is meant to be lumpy, because it's all about texture and actually creating sculptural tapestries was the focus of that workshop. But, you know, within one day, from 10 till 4, you know, I learned to make a tapestry. I learned to blend different colours, and I mean, it was just amazing. So I really do recommend that if you fancy having a go. I think that's all I wanted to say. So I just very much hope you enjoy the show and hopefully find it a worthy follow-up to Bruegel. Thanks very much.